It's been a long time since we actually had a new operating system. Back in the day, we had new ones kind of all the time, from Windows and DOS to OS2, which got killed ultimately. Even Windows itself was changing constantly. Mac OS new versions were coming out every few years and meaningfully changed the way that we interface with our computers. Since then, that dried up. Back in the mobile days, things were even more chaotic, where we had iOS and Android, sure. We also had WebOS, we had BlackBerry OS, we had Tizen, we had all the crazy stuff Mozilla was doing. We had Windows Phone, we had so many options. Well, over the last few years, that's kind of stopped. We've been using the same operating systems for a while now. And as much as I love the ones that I use as a big Mac and iOS fan, and as powerful as Linux is, the year to Linux desktop never happened. And as such, we haven't really seen many changes in the way that we compute. Obviously, this comes with benefits, like we have stable OSs, and when you write a program for 2 operating systems, you now cover most users. But on the other hand, it's preventing certain types of innovation. While these OSs have served computers and phones decently well, there are platforms that they haven't really served, be it your TV, which is still a chaotic world of shitty software, or the thing we're talking about today, virtual reality. Virtual reality is far from standardized when it comes to the operating system. If you're using a Steam-based headset, you're using one that's full of weird, chaotic implementations coming from Valve and many others. If you're using a headset from Apple, you're using their fancy new Vision OS, which I'll admit is actually an incredible experience. I did not expect Vision OS to be as different and powerful as it was. But the majority of people who are using VR, they're all using the same OS already. That OS, as of today, not only has a name, but is accessible to other companies as well. This is because Meta's decided to finally share the ability to use their operating system for their headsets. The Oculus virtual reality operating system is now called Horizon OS, and for the first time ever, other companies can use the operating system that Meta has poured billions of dollars into building. I was very surprised when I saw this announcement coming from Meta, but honestly, the more I've thought about it, the more it really does make sense. It aligns well with their goals and their model, and in the end, they're just trying to make a very successful platform for mixed reality and virtual reality experiences. Meta doesn't want to sell hardware. They don't want to sell the most popular headset. They want to have the software that is used by most of the popular headsets. Their goal here is really interesting, and it does remind me a lot of the Windows versus Mac strategies back in the day, where in order to have Mac OS, you had to have a Mac computer. But in order to use Windows, you could use any other computer. You could even install Windows on a Mac. The reason Microsoft did that is they wanted everyone to be using Windows. Their goal was to be the default, the standard, the thing everyone used. And as such, Meta's taken a lot of inspiration. They saw what Windows did, they saw what Android did, and now they want to do that same thing for virtual reality. This is particularly funny because Horizon OS is actually a fork of Android originally. So what the hell's going on here? I want to go through their official announcement, but I also want to cover Zuck's coverage, as well as a really interesting thing that came up right before filming, which is that John Carmack doesn't actually think this is a good idea. John's a legend and one of my favorite programmers and human beings ever, so I'm very curious what he has to say here, because I don't know if I agree with him. But first, let's read the official announcement. Today, we're taking the next step towards our vision for a more open computing platform for the metaverse. We're opening up the operating system powering our Meta Quest devices to third-party hardware makers, giving more choice to consumers and a larger ecosystem for developers to build for. I don't like the phrasing of opening up because they didn't open source it, which is sad, especially when you consider how much stuff Meta's open sourced, be it React, the framework that made my original channel blow up, or things like the crazy expensive ML models they've been creating, like Llama. The fact that Llama 3 is open source for anyone to use is mind-blowing, but they understand their role isn't to be the company that has exclusive control over everything. It's to be a source of technologies that push the world forward so their platforms can stay as important and grow as much as they intend. We're working with leading global technology companies to bring this new ecosystem to life, and we're making it even easier for developers to build apps and reach their audiences on the platform. Also fair, since Valve has stopped really caring about VR, which, fight me all you want, Valve does not give a fuck about VR right now. Ever since the Steam Deck took off, they stopped caring. Now, if you're a manufacturer of headsets, you're kind of screwed because Valve isn't getting any better. And your competition now is the Vision Pro, which is an incredible, really high-end device, or Meta, which is an exclusive lockdown ecosystem. Previously, Zuck said he didn't want to have the lockdown. He wanted to be the open alternative to what Apple was doing. Now he's tripling down on that here. And finally, other manufacturers have reason to build VR headsets again because they didn't even have software for them. And the amount of money it would cost to build software sucks, especially when you consider nobody's going to use the thing that you built. Introducing Meta Horizon OS. By the way, when I was making the thumbnail for stream today, this is the only official Meta Horizon OS asset that they've published, so I couldn't find a real logo. Ugh. Anyways, this new hardware ecosystem will run on Meta Horizon OS, the mixed reality operating system that powers our Meta Quest headsets. We chose this name to reflect our vision of a computing platform built around people and connection, and the shared social fabric that makes this possible. I know this is marketing bullshit lingo speak, but I want to challenge you for just a moment on that. The idea of an operating system that is built around mixed reality and virtual reality is fundamentally different. And one of the most complex parts of that is interaction. If my roommate's in the room and I'm using my computer and I want to talk to my roommate, it's pretty easy to do such. I go like this. If I'm using a VR headset and I want to talk to my roommate, suddenly things are very different. The idea that your headset and the operating system for it should have some idea of socialization and how we should socialize is important. We chose this name to reflect our vision. Yeah, as I said, this is marketing bullshit, but I also kind of agree with it. Meta Horizon OS combines the core technologies powering today's mixed reality experiences with a suite of features that put social presence at the center of the platform. Again, kind of marketing bullshit, but the idea that this operating system inherently has to be more social than a traditional OS is something that I kind of agree with. Now that I've seen how it feels to talk to somebody in the Vision Pro, and in comparison, how bad it feels to call somebody in the Vision Pro, there's something very real about what they're saying here. And I actually think Meta is uniquely positioned to do this right. Meta Horizon OS is the result of a decade of work by Meta to build a next-generation computing platform. To pioneer standalone headsets, we developed technologies like inside-out tracking, and for more natural interaction systems and social presence, we developed eye, face, hand, and body tracking. For mixed reality, we built a full stack of technologies for blending the digital and physical worlds, including high-resolution pass-through, scene understanding, and spatial anchors. That half of these things aren't that important, but all of them do make VR better. And there's a handful in here that were actually groundbreaking at the time. Like the inside-out tracking, no one else came close before they released the in-out tracking that they did. Like actually surreal. So yeah. Makes sense. They put a lot of time into this, as they say. This long-term investment that began on the mobile-first foundations of the Android open source project has produced a full mixed reality operating system used by millions of people. I love that they called it AOSP. This is the classic, like this is the core of Android, the same way Chromium's the core of Chrome. They're not hiding the fact that they started with the mobile-first AOSP. In fact, a lot of the early VR headsets were literally taking Android phones and putting them in a headset, especially the Samsung stuff. Gear OS and the Gear VR world was chaotic at the time. Devs and creators can take advantage of all these technologies using the custom frameworks and tooling that they've built for creating mixed reality experiences, and they can reach their communities and grow their businesses through the content discovery and monetization platforms built into the OS. This is another one of those big things people don't seem to understand. The Meta Quest store is actually pretty damn good about recommending stuff. They regularly will promote indie devs publishing their first game on the homepage of the store. And since there is so little content in VR still, there's a decent chance if you put a lot of time into making a good VR game that it will be promoted heavily by Meta. That's cool. There aren't many places nowadays where you can just make a really good thing, upload it, charge for it, and expect it to sell at all. It's pretty cool that this is the case. And I'm pumped that like now these things are more accessible in general. Oh, they're actually renaming it to the Meta Horizon store. I think that's a fair call because they don't want it to be specific to the Quest line. I like the idea of splitting Quest and Horizon. Feels weird, but I get it because they don't want others putting out a Quest headset. They can put out a Horizon headset, but the Quest headset also runs Horizon. The same way that like Google had the Pixel phones and the Pixel phones run Android. Reasonable thing to separate. It seems like a lot of inspiration coming from Android as a whole here. Not the open source part though. Wish they would do that. The Horizon social layer currently powering Meta Quest devices will extend across this new ecosystem. It enables people's identities, avatars, and friend groups to move with them across virtual spaces, and it lets developers integrate rich social features into their apps. This is the real reason they're pushing this. They want to make sure every other headset manufacturer has no reason to put a bunch of time into new software and instead uses this. Like if you're Samsung and you're making a new phone, you could make a phone using Android and it comes with all Google services and everything else. Or you could make a phone using your own OS that has no apps, has no users, has no ecosystem, and nobody wants it. It is very expensive to build in the first place. By doing this, they have made it way less likely that other companies are going to make VR operating systems. And on top of that, they made it much more likely that if you buy a random VR headset, that is going to have all of Meta's stuff installed already. When you consider that Meta's goal is to be the social network of all generations, it makes a lot of sense that they want the operating system that is inherently the most social OS ever made to be deeply integrated with their platform. It makes a lot of sense. I'm still for this though. I think this is a good call. It allows for the entire VR ecosystem to move much faster Because the social layer is made to bridge multiple platforms, people can spend time together in virtual worlds that exist across mixed reality, mobile, and desktop devices. Another thing that generally we've struggled with in VR is making experiences that are good for people inside a headset and outside of a headset. There's a couple games that play into this idea, but not that many. And I'm excited to see more experiences that expect some people on desktop, some on mobile, and some on VR, where everybody's having the best possible time. Meta Horizon OS devices will also use the same mobile companion app that Meta Quest owners use today. We'll rename that as well to be the Meta Horizon app. Also an underrated thing, the setup on the Quest is surprisingly nice, and it's all through the app. It's cool they're not going to force developers to make their own. This makes it so other hardware companies are much more likely to adopt. I want to watch the video, and then I'll dig through all of this. So let's watch what Zuck has to say. I'll finish covering this, and then we'll look at that pushback, because it is actually really interesting stuff. Let's see, a totally human Mark Zuckerberg that isn't being controlled by a PR firm. I'm joking. I'm actually pretty pro Zuck nowadays.
Hey, is this on? All right, some updates on the metaverse today. We are releasing Meta Horizon OS, our operating system that powers Quest virtual and mixed reality headsets, and we are partnering with some of the best hardware companies out there to design new headsets that are optimized for all the different ways that people use this tech.
This is a petty thing, but the logo that was there, they haven't exposed that anywhere. So I couldn't find that logo to use for things. It's a small, annoying thing as a creator, but it's a thing regardless.
Now, in every era of computing, there are always open and closed models. And with phones, Apple's closed model basically won out. Phones are tightly controlled, and you're kind of locked into what they'll let you do. But it doesn't have to be that way. In the PC era, the open model won out. You can do a lot more things, install mods, you've got more diversity of hardware, software, and more. So our goal is to make it so that the open model defines the next generation of computing, again, with the metaverse, glasses, and headsets.
I think this is a fair thing. I think that we went through chaos with mobile where like the BlackBerry, the Palm, and all the other devices were so incompatible that it actually resulted in something like Java being more relevant because Java's pitch was it runs on everything. Virtual reality doesn't have the equivalent of that at all. There's no concept of you make your VR app once and then it works on the Vision Pro, then it works on the Quest, it works on a phone being shoved in front of your face, it works on the Valve Index. That idea of multi-platform software just did not exist inside of virtual reality. But in order for VR to get more popular, we need all of the options to get better. We need people who have all of these different headsets and buy different solutions to have access to software because we need developers to be rewarded for making good software. Imagine you pour your whole life, your heart and everything into making an app for the Vision Pro. And then Apple decides to stop making the Vision Pro. What the fuck do you do with that? If you put all this time and energy into a Swift app for the Vision Pro, how do you move that to the Quest? How do you move that to other places? An open model is very important in this space as it establishes and grows. And considering how much less likely it is that you own a headset than that you own a phone, it's more important than ever in the history of new computing platforms that there are opportunities for a developer to spread their solutions around other spaces. And if Meta is the gateway for me to make an app once and have it be on every headset, that's a really promising thing. And without this type of effort, it's less likely the devs make good apps for VR, and it's less likely that VR and AR and mixed reality all succeed as a whole. So normally I side with Apple on these things. I'm sure y'all know most of my videos here are either lambasting them for the App Store or generally praising them. I think there's a lot of value in an open model in a new computing platform, and I would be really sad if Meta doesn't at least somewhat succeed with their goals here. In fact, I'll make a bold statement. If Meta doesn't find success with this, it might be the end of VR as a whole.
So that's why we're releasing our operating system so that more companies can build different things on it. We've been building Meta Horizon OS for about a decade. We started building it off Android, and while it's still compatible, we've now built it into a much broader and more capable mixed reality and spatial computing OS. The key ideas behind Meta Horizon OS
I have to say, it is particularly funny that they're pulling Lex Friedman clips inside of a discussion of their new operating system. Like, what world are we in that one of the most valuable companies in the world is making an announcement that's this important, and they're using clips from the Lex Friedman podcast in it? Like, salute Lex. You have broken the fourth wall and YouTubed your way to being one of the most important figures in the general business and tech space now, and I'm genuinely proud of you for it. Like, no irony at all. Lex has had such a crazy impact with what he's done that he's making it into shit like this. I would go as far as to say shit like this might not exist if it wasn't for Lex showing that a more human approach for even business people is really valuable. And yes, the quality of these virtual reality avatars, whatever you want to call them, is insane. These just look real. If you haven't already watched watched the podcast, I'd recommend it, both because Zuck's a really interesting individual to interview, and also because the tech has gotten really good. They admit that these models are handcrafted some amount. Like this wasn't, they took a picture of their face and a model was spit out perfectly, but they're working on that. They're working on all this crazy AI stuff to train things like that. There's a future where this quality of model gets generated and you put on a headset and you talk to your friend, it's like you're in the same room. Like we are getting there. We're getting there alarmingly quick.
Are a feeling of presence with people, no matter where you physically are, bringing digital objects like huge screens into your physical space, navigating and interacting with virtual spaces, and supporting developers and creators and building all of these new apps and experiences.
I want to highlight that part in particular. One of the things that Meta has never gotten enough credit for was the early days of VR and especially VR gaming. When the Oculus came out originally as the Oculus Rift CV1, the consumer version 1, it was a pretty expensive headset and there was basically no software for it. And at the time, Facebook did not want that to be the case. They wanted to make sure if they were selling this new hardware from this company they had just acquired, that there was things to do on it. Here we are. So the year that the Quest came out, they actually invested $500 million in third-party software development. Those were grants to developers of VR software, with the only expectation being that the software comes out first on Oculus. This was never about exclusivity in the traditional sense. This was making sure there's stuff to do on your headset. And the vast majority of games that received funding through this, including classics like Beat Saber and Superhot, the Superhot studio of which only existed because of this grant. None of those softwares are considered or ever really were exclusives within the Meta Quest, Oculus, whatever you want to call it, ecosystem. In fact, my first experience with Beat Saber was in Steam on a headset by Valve. So yeah, a lot of the software that made VR great then, and arguably still makes VR great now, came directly from Zuckerberg himself signing off that the company invests $500 million into third-party devs making software for their platform. There is effectively no comparison in any other industry of a company just showing up and pissing this much money into third-party stuff. I don't think this gets enough credit, and I think it should. Most companies would spend a bunch of money making like 3 bad games that are exclusives within the company. Facebook said, no, we're not going to sit here and pretend we can make great games. We're just going to pay people who make great games to make great games that work inside of our headsets. And if you look through the history of different like games that were good in VR, so many of them had their genesis through this funding. For comparison's sake, at the same time, there was a game called Onward that was getting popular for the Valve headset, specifically the one HTC made, the Vive. The Vive had a really popular game on Steam called Onward, which is kind of like Counter-Strike in VR, that was made by one dude. He obviously needed funding and support some amount, so Valve decided they would help him out by paying to fly him to the Valve office for a week to work in the office with them. That was it. No funding. If I recall, they didn't even cover his hotel at the time. I might be wrong about that, so don't quote me on that. But they flew him out to hang out at their office versus Meta pissing hundreds of millions of dollars into those same types of developers. So you could build a Valve exclusive game and get a flight, or you could build a temporarily exclusive or even just released first on Oculus game for millions of dollars of funding. That feels like an obvious option here. It was actually really cool to see a company like Facebook investing in helping game developers find success. When you compare that to Apple, who just takes money from game developers, or Valve, who also just takes money from game devs, but also flies them out occasionally for like a signaling, like trying to look cool type thing. Facebook's historically actually been one of the most positive presence in gaming ever. And I have friends whose careers started because of the grants that happened here. So yes, Facebook has absolutely pissed an ungodly amount of money into making VR and VR games by third parties way better than they ever would have been otherwise.
You can do all this on Quest today, but now we're also working with Lenovo, Asus ROG, Xbox, and more to build headsets that are going to be designed for specific use cases.
This is another really interesting one. I've been catching on to this a bit. It feels like Meta and Microsoft are realizing that they have no reason to compete, and they're aligning more and more in these types of places. I've also generally been very supportive of Xbox and their goals. I've been surprised how much Xbox, especially since Phil became the CEO again, has actually cared about gamers and what they want and need. It's a simple, stupid thing, but like Phil's a gamer. And he has complained off the record, but like in business conversations that have since leaked, that he was very frustrated that he would use like a Steam Deck or even the Asus ROG handhelds and syncing his game saves between that and his Xbox was obnoxious. And they wanted to make sure that if they go in that direction of like working with or building their own like headsets, handhelds, all of these things, that the Xbox experience of your saves being shared between things and you buy it once, it works everywhere. They want to make sure all of that stays, but they can't just go build their own VR headset and have no software for it. So it actually makes a lot of sense that if Xbox decides to do a VR headset, which it sounds like they are, that they're going to lean into the Meta operating system and the Meta ecosystem. And rather than build their own Xbox ecosystem, they're going to blend the two together. Very interesting idea.
So you can imagine a lightweight headset that pairs with your computer on your desk to provide the best work experience, whether you're at home or anywhere else you go. Or you can imagine one that's fully focused on watching immersive entertainment like movies and videos with the highest resolution OLED screens. Or think of one that's fully optimized for gaming with support for all kinds of different peripherals and haptics. You can imagine one that's designed for exercise, that's extra light with sweat-wicking materials. Or maybe just a version that comes out of the box with Xbox controllers and a Game Pass so that you can immediately just start playing on a big screen anywhere you go.
These are all great examples because they show that these other businesses have other incentives and things they want to do that aren't within Meta's interests. When the original Oculus Rift came out, the CV1, it shipped with an Xbox controller. At the time, it was my first Xbox One controller because I only had 360s beforehand. And it was a phenomenal controller and it worked great with my headset. Meta doesn't want you to use other controllers because their whole thing is making the most interactive VR experiences. But there are a lot of incredible VR experiences you can have with a traditional Xbox controller. And if Xbox wants to make a better way to play a big screen game or maybe even have some VR stuff, but you're still controlling it with a normal controller, they can go make that headset now. And they can still have access to this huge ecosystem that Meta has pissed billions of dollars into.
We're also, as part of this, going to be opening up our store to give you even more options to use whatever experiences you want. So whether they're on Steam, Xbox, cloud gaming, our own app lab, or even Google Play, if they're up for it, our philosophy...
What a fucking call out there. Did y'all hear that? Even Google Play, very subtle after, if they're up for it. This whole move is Zuckerberg taunting Apple and Google because both have locked down their marketplaces and their rule of their operating system so heavily that he's poking and prodding at them, letting them know that's not how it works over here. If you want to participate in our new world, feel free. But we're over here doing it this way because we want to make the platform succeed, not the store. Very subtle jab that is very, very powerful.
Philosophy is that we want you to be able to run the content on Quest or any Meta Horizon operating system headset. All right, so opening our OS, that's the next step in bringing all these different use cases of the metaverse to everyone. It's probably going to take a couple of years for some of these new products to start launching, but I'm really excited to get started on this next chapter and to get this into your hands as soon as possible. Hey, this is...
Yeah, I liked this a lot. And I have the hot take that it's pretty clear Zuckerberg genuinely loves VR, AR, and this idea of like mixed reality virtual worlds. It's just always been aligned with the things he's interested in. And a lot of people have been skeptical of like the rebranding to Meta and all these things. But if you look at this as an excited kid who just wants to put on a headset and go anywhere in the world with any people ever, that's what he's doing here. And it excites me to see somebody who is this genuinely hyped about VR that also happens to run a multi-billion-dollar company to pour in all of this effort and investment and time and all of these things in order to make VR successful. This is really cool. Like App Lab is the way that people could try out new app ideas and like publish them so that someone could install them on their headset. It's kind of like Test Flight on iOS if you're familiar. Previously, you had to go through a whole process to be promoted from App Lab to the Horizon store. It seems like App Lab titles will soon be featured in a dedicated section of the store on all devices, which is huge. As I mentioned before, their discovery is dope. And the idea of promoting discovery of things that are so early in the lab to be discovered is awesome. Like some of the biggest titles, they said like Gorilla Tag and Gym Class started on App Lab, and now they're huge independent things that are very successful. They're also developing a new spatial app framework that helps mobile devs create mixed reality experiences. Also huge. Most of the VR frameworks and engines are focused on you have one game open with everything surrounding you, and that's it. Like the game is the thing you're doing, or the experience is the thing you're doing. But if I want like an interactive photo gallery, my office suite, and my Xbox game all at once with some amount of like, yes, some of these are just mobile apps in my headset, but some of them have a ways to interact that are useful too. Like I want to be able to pick a photo and drop it over there. That can only happen if you have app frameworks that are aware of these concepts. And we don't really have that which is why I'm excited about a framework built just for this. Not just games, but multifaceted 3D experiences that are just interactive. Developers will be able to use tools they're already familiar with to bring their mobile apps to Meta Horizon OS or to create entirely new mixed reality apps. Developers can apply for access here. I'll be applying after this for sure. Along with a more open app store, Meta Horizon OS will continue to give people more choices in how to access apps. Because we don't restrict users to titles from our own app store, there are already multiple ways to access great content on Meta Horizon OS, including popular game services like Game Pass Ultimate or through Steam Link or our own AirLink system for wirelessly streaming PC software to headsets. And we encourage the Google Play 2D App Store to come to Meta Horizon OS, where it can operate with the same economic model it does on other platforms. Again, they're trying to bait Google, which I appreciate. And also, to be fair, you've always been able to sideload apps on a Quest. They've been pretty friendly about that compared to something like anything by Apple. So it's cool to see them doubling down on that. Consumers and developers alike stand to benefit the most from an ecosystem where multiple hardware makers build on a common platform. Our partners are excited to begin this journey with us. They have a quote from the CEO of ASUS, from the CEO of Lenovo, and from the CEO of Qualcomm, who, by the way, a lot of why Qualcomm has bothered innovating has been Meta bullying them into it. So cool to have them hopping in here too. And obviously they're hyped because more companies are going to be signing insane contracts with them. Cool. Let's hear the pushback, because I could sit here getting really hyped about this all day, but if Carmack disagrees, I might have missed something. So let's see what he has to say. John Carmack doesn't think providing Horizon OS to third-party headsets is a good idea for Meta. Let's see. John Carmack just gave his take on Meta's new strategy of providing its headset OS to third-party hardware companies. Carmack points out that third parties will have to price higher than Quest, since Meta sells its hardware at cost. Right now they do, but that can change over time. Like, a lot of the Pixel phones by Google are sold at cost. Well, were. And now they're making their own chips. They probably are sold at cost some amount again. But that changes. It goes up and down over time as the cost to make these things changes. Like, this is a very right now comment, which is weird because normally Carmack's almost too much so thinking long term. Carmack has repeatedly called for lower cost headsets that open up the VR market to more people. Okay, this is an issue. He doesn't think that VR headsets can get cheap enough without Meta covering cost. And if you open up the headset, the price could reasonably start going up rather than down. On one hand, I agree. On the other hand, the likelihood of hardware competition, like let's say I'm Qualcomm or I'm a lens manufacturer making the lenses for your VR headsets, the likelihood that I as a manufacturer of those parts would ever care to compete or make the prices smaller is very low if I only have two customers. The only companies buying my parts are Valve and Meta, and no one else is. I'm not going to ever be competitive because I can charge those companies whatever. They don't have alternatives. But if I have to convince 7 companies or 20 companies instead, and if I fail to convince some of them, another manufacturer comes up and goes cheaper. There is so much more competition that is possible if you force the market to be competitive. And that's what I'm excited about when I see this, is it's more likely that more hardware manufacturers will compete for deals for every component, resulting in the components being made by a wider set of companies trying to drive the price down. The only way the market will make the price cheaper is through incentives like this. And if you do actually want the things to get cheaper, Carmack, you should be excited about this because it looks like a lot of manufacturers are going to have reasons to compete now, where before they could charge whatever they wanted to Meta. I don't even want to know how much the stupid VR specific chip that they bought was. I know it wasn't a number I'd like, but this can now change. While he says Meta's strategy will enable boutique headsets that push areas like resolution, field of view, or comfort, he suggests this brings with it attention that Meta will no longer have the shine of making industry-leading high-end gear, which he suggests will force Meta to focus on novel new hardware systems for the research pipeline for their high-end devices, which is going to lead to poor decisions. He's more qualified than I am to make statements like this. I'll be very real. Generally speaking, if him and I disagree about something Meta's doing, he probably knows more than I do. He worked there for a while. That said, he's making a lot of assumptions about market forces that I don't necessarily agree with. Like, again, let's think about the Pixel. Is Google forced to focus on novel new hardware systems for the research pipeline for their higher end systems because other cheaper Android phones exist? I don't think so. In fact, I think the Pixels had a really important role of establishing a baseline of quality for what an Android phone should be. One of the coolest parts of the Pixel line is that it's a guarantee that you pay this much money and you have a phone that's at least this good. And now it makes sense that competition has to make better phones for more reasonable prices because Google now has a meaningful product that's threatening their potential dominance of the space. So I think this take has played out because we've seen this in other spaces and it didn't work this way. This point, though, is very important. VR is held back more by software than hardware. Absolutely. So imagine if the software was no longer the thing we were always fighting over. If the software was a standard that everyone was using, now we can innovate on that much more meaningfully without having to copy every innovation on every single platform independently. That's a huge win. The fact that we have one software platform that we can all work on and innovate on together and build our own experiences within together is a huge win for the industry. And yes, the hardware isn't particularly competitive right now. I don't even necessarily agree with that. Like the Vision Pro is so far beyond hardware-wise anything I've ever experienced in technology that I don't think it's held back by hardware, but the hardware has a long ways to go. The software has way more to go and is absolutely blocking things more. But having a standard platform we can all work within together is a massive win for all of the things he's saying here, which is why I'm confused. Carmack's biggest criticism of the idea is from a software perspective. He claims the strategy will be a drag on software development at Meta because the engineering resources needed to make the OS suitable for third parties and maintaining good communication, as well as trying to not break your partner's stuff, will steal the focus of Meta's key software engineers that would be better spent improving the system. This is vital in his words because VR is held back more by hardware than software. I'm going to do a slightly controversial tangent here. I use a lot of Mac OS and I use a lot of Windows. What you see here is my Mac. You might assume I stream on Mac, but you might have noticed there's no OBS here because I don't film my content on Mac. I film and manage most of my content from a PC. I have one PC under there. I have another in my room way over there on the other side of my apartment. And I have the parts for a third PC showing up today. And I bought that Dell 4090 a couple days ago. I spend a lot of time on Windows, arguably too much time. Windows is the single platform that has had to care the most about backwards compatibility ever, period. You can run old MS-DOS programs from the 90s on your brand new Windows 11 PC without too much effort, and that's nuts. Windows has had to put an insane amount of money and time and energy into making sure it can evolve while being backwards compatible, and that resulted in some really iffy times. That said, my Mac has to put in way less effort. It is getting comparably unstable. It is hard for me to admit this, and it genuinely upsets me, but the stability of a properly set up Windows install is comparable to that of a recently purchased Mac machine. And it didn't used to be that way. Mac used to be way more stable because of the things he's saying here. Because Mac didn't have to worry about breaking other computers' expectations, breaking other software expectations. They could kind of just do whatever they wanted. And that allowed them to make bigger jumps, like the move to ARM, but it doesn't seem to have helped their stability that much because my Mac and my PC are full of a roughly equal level of stupid fucking bugs now. So I want to agree with this point because I want to continue bragging about how much better Apple is. But due to the fact that my personal experience is such that the stability of these platforms is not like an obvious win in favor of Apple, it's hard for me to feel as strongly this way nowadays. Genuinely. Windows is full of absurd fucking quirks, believe me. But Mac's also got its fair share nowadays too. So I don't agree with this entirely. If there's other engineers at Meta working on these things who are already starting to feel these pains, I could be convinced out of it. But yeah, I'm not feeling this immediately. Carmack finished his statement by suggesting an alternative approach, allowing partners access to the full OS build for standard Quest hardware, which he claimed could be done very cheaply and enable specialty applications and location-based entertainment, though he acknowledges it would be a much lower key announcement. Let's read his actual statement because this article sucks. No offense. Meta already sells the Quest systems basically at production cost, and it just ignores the development costs. So don't expect this to result in cheaper VR headsets from other companies with Quest equivalent capabilities. I don't expect this in the next few years, but long term, absolutely. Especially if this takes off, this will guarantee prices get lower. So short term, yes, this does not mean we're going to get a cheaper Quest next year. This means that the manufacturing of parts the Quests use could get cheaper over the next 5 years, though. Even if the other companies have greater efficiency, they can't compete with that. Now, again, I just disagree. What it can do is enable a variety of high-end boutique headsets, as you get with Varjo, Pimax, Big Screen on Steam VR. The Big Screen headset's nuts, by the way. By pushing on resolution, field of view, push on comfort, etc., you could drive the Apple displays for Quest Silicon. You can make headsets for people with extremely wide or narrow IPDs or unusual head or face shapes. You could add crazy cooling systems and overclock everything, all with full app compatibility, but at a higher price point. That would be great. I think he's... As I read this, I feel like he's so focused in on the technical details that he's missing the business incentives that command all of this. The reason things change isn't because, technically speaking, these companies have technical advantages. It's because, generally speaking, multiple businesses trying to acquire things allows for the market to shift. And I think that this allows the market to shift in a way that makes VR better for everyone. This brings the attention because Meta as a company, as well as the individual engineers, want the shine of making industry-leading high-end gear. This he absolutely knows better than anyone else because he helped run that team. And I believe that the engineers certainly love the feeling of creating this new headset and sharing it with the world and the power of making this new thing that you can hold and use and enjoy. But I'm a software developer. I love seeing people open up the new thing I built. I love seeing people give feedback on a thing that I created and not having to buy a physical good of mine to see it. So yes, I agreed that there are hardware engineers at Meta that are going to be sad to not have that same level of like response and excitement around their stuff. But on the other hand, as a software developer, the idea of my changes affecting a wider set of people and companies is exciting. And I think this will be more a cultural shift around where people get excitement from rather than a binary. They're going from very excited to no longer excited. So again, disagree. If Meta cedes those simple scaling axes to other headset devs, they will be left leaning in with novel new hardware systems from the research pipeline for their high-end systems, which is going to lead to poor decisions. I fundamentally disagree with this point because we've already seen what happens when they try this. I owned the Quest Pro. I returned the Quest Pro because despite all of the crazy innovations that Meta had put into it, it just wasn't that great a headset. The tracking was not there for my professional tier Beat Saber play. The screen wasn't great. I didn't like the fact that everything was visible because they had like the like glasses type screen. You could put a visor over it, but it didn't feel right. And the Quest 3 is honestly a better headset than the Quest Pro, which surprised me because the Quest Pro is like $1,200 and the Quest 3 was like $400. That all said, the Vision Pro shits all over all of it, but it's already been made clear by Meta that they're not that interested in doing the higher end stuff because they discontinued the Quest Pro a few months after releasing it, which is crazy when you think about it. They put out a $1,200 headset and almost immediately afterwards discontinued it. What? They don't want to do the high-end hardware. In fact, it seems like part of this decision is to allow others to go do the high-end hardware innovation and let them focus on building the platform. Because as you've said multiple times now, Carmack, the software is the issue here. What if Meta could be focused on the software part and not have to ship new hardware every 2 years to keep people happy? This sounds great. This is what Valve did and it worked okay for them. I don't see why it wouldn't work for Meta. Ugh. Anyways. Yeah, as I just said, VR is held back more by software than hardware. What if Meta could focus more on the software? What if they had more incentives, more partners, more business reasons to make the software better? This initiative will be a drag on software development at Meta. Again, this is the part I just don't necessarily agree on, just understanding the business aspect of it. Unquestionably, I'm sitting here questioning it, motherfucker. Preparing the entire system for sharing, then maintaining good communication and trying not to break your partners will steal the focus of key developers. Yeah, I already read this part. It's tempting to think this is just a matter of increasing the budget, but that's not how it works in practice. Sharing the system with partners is not a cost that can be cleanly factored out. It can't be, but it also accelerates other things. Having other partners with different needs gives you a unique perspective to push the platform forward. Like, is Linux worse off because everyone can contribute to it? I think it's important to recognize that when more people have access and dependencies on a thing, it becomes more stable, more reliable, and usually better. And while this is a different way of building than Meta has done historically, I think you're getting a little too game dev brained here, and it's sad to see. I still massively respect everything Carmack has to say, and there's as I said before, decent chance I'm wrong about this because he has both more inside knowledge and way more experience in this field as a whole, but he doesn't think about the business side enough. He's never been the business guy, and that's where my concerns are coming from. We thought they moved all development to be open like PyTorch. Okay, that's fair. If his issue is that it's partially open, not fully open, I wish he would have started with that. Is like, if his stance was you either are fully closed or fully open, this in between just is the worst of both, I can hear that argument. There are ways to frame that. But this idea that this is inherently bad is just something I don't really agree with. I think that's it though. I'm excited about this. I'm excited to see more new headsets. I'll probably go play with my Quest 3 after this because I'm actually curious to see how many software updates it has. I'm still a Vision Pro boy. I still love that headset, but the idea of a VR, AR, mixed reality platform and operating system is actually really exciting. Let me know what you guys think though, because I know this is going to be a controversial one. Until next time, peace nerds.